Now we're moving up into more recent times, that in June of 1982, I got that from reading that, I went on a train to New York City with a group of people that were much younger than I was, like they were in their 30s or something, or 40s, and we marched up Central Park West, and I don't know what we did. We ate dinner. We had a great day. It was thrilling. Oh yeah, we sat on the big green there and listened to speakers, and so on. That was one of the highlights.
So that was for what?
Let's see. What were we protesting about?
Was that the
nuclear
freeze?
war?
It was coming. That was the resurgence of the anti-nuclear movement in 1982, and I can't remember.
I saw Rona and her husband at the railroad station. I remember seeing them. Those were the only people that I saw that I knew from Newton. I was with the Cambridge group, and I had a wonderful day. We shift now a couple of years. I'm leaving out stuff, I know I am. Okay, a little description of the Peace Boutique would be that it sort of became an end in itself. It was a place where people could get together and where it was a focus of anti-war activity, but at the same time it was actually a selling thing. People brought in arts and crafts, as you know, and they all were devoted to trying to raise money. The amounts of money that they raised, I really think were negligible, because I did the bookkeeping, and I don't think it was a neck and neck thing to pay the rent and pay whatever craftspeople you paid and come out with a teensy-weensy bit of profit that you could give in a small amount to some organization that they elected, like, let's say, Peace Mobilization or something like that. And so it became an end. It obscured what it really was in a way, but it was a focus. It was a good place for people to get together. Not a large number of people, I don't think, were involved. And finally,
but it was a place where there was information shared too,
there was always
people
sheets
got
of
to know.
stuff that you knew about meetings. You knew everything that was happening. In fact, I don't know of another place in Newton that had that. That was where you found out what there was about the peace movement. And for instance, if there was going to be a really big thing, you would find out about that there. But at that time, I couldn't help noticing that the peace movement was fractured, and that the movement the women's movement was coming on strong. And then there began to be big environmental issues. And then people began to go off into this direction and that direction. And it was totally not what it set out to be, because it was all divided up into all these movements. And there were like 60 movements where once there had been one. And I was terribly disappointed at the time. And I used to talk to people about it and say how disappointed I was that the peace movement was being obliterated by the women's movement, which I didn't think was as important. And even the environmental thing, which people got very hot on, didn't seem to me to be in a class with an anti-war movement. And so that were my feelings at that time. I was really disappointed to see what happened, and it happened. It actually happened.
Now, how did you feel about the women's movement?
Well, I've already just said it wasn't. To me, it wasn't a big deal. It never had been a big deal.
Why wasn't it a big deal?
Well, that wasn't what my life seemed to be about. I didn't feel I had to achieve or to push to achieve something as a woman. I never felt that was an issue. And
so you already felt that you had
I could do what
the ability
I wanted.
to do what
I happened not to want to do anything because I was so much wrapped up in my husband and my family. I worked for my husband, actually. So that was pretty hard. I had to go to work, and then the one day I came and worked at the peace movement, and I never felt that the women's and the environment and whatever else happened at that time could hold a candle to the importance of the peace movement, and the peace movement sort of got squashed, and it has remained that way. And then, for instance, that peace mobilization was formed, which took in everything, and was sort of like the solution of my problem, that it would be an umbrella for all of these these little different pieces of movements which people were dividing up into. People were working real hard on the woman's thing, and nobody, the peace movement went off into the shadows, I think. Maybe because of the world situation, which didn't threaten us at that time. Let's try to think. Well, we had that nuclear scare with Reagan. That came after that. I'm mixed up about it, but I know that I was really frightened at the time. And I went to this meeting where I heard Helen Caldecott speak, and I was really frightened at the threat of the nuclear thing. But I think we turned that off. It was in that article. We stopped that somehow. When I say we, I mean all the people who felt the same way that I did. We stopped it somehow. And it remains a problem to this day. There's no focus. And I think that's part of the tragedy of it. I have a friend in Canada who was with the Voice of Women, who's terrifically active. She went to Geneva and she did all kinds of things, and she's still doing the exact same stuff that we were doing back in the 60s. She's reading papers, she's appearing before big bodies, and she works hard against war, and she isn't. And up in Canada, they don't seem to have, they didn't let it dissolve the way our thing just vanished off the earth. Okay, I have to pause again. During the 50s and the 60s even, but not so much in the 60s, in the late 40s and the 50s, we lived in, you might say, almost in terror. We were afraid of always being arrested and being separated, and we tried to protect our children, and we also, my husband's role as a lawyer was with that very work, because he represented literally hundreds of people before the various committees. There was a committee in Massachusetts, I guess, I can't remember its name, but it was probably against communism or something, some name like that. It just copied one of the Washington ones. And all the union members that he represented were called before this committee, one after another, steadily. He was either in Washington or New York or in Boston or New Bedford or one of the other cities representing all these people. I was doing all the typing of it and everything, so I knew every word of it. And we lived with that. At the same time that we had it in our own lives, we had it in the lives of all the people. They weren't my friends like the women that I met in the Voice of Women. This is another group of people. These are workers, factory workers. And these people were being accused all the time of being communists. And my husband was frequently the lawyer for that, and that was tough. And sometimes he was called before a committee as a lawyer, and he had to take a position, and then it was in the newspapers that night, a big headline. It was damn unpleasant for my children, because I remember
What was your husband's name?
Alan Rosenberg.
Okay.
And one of the things that happened was one night, I'll never remember, one afternoon, my oldest son was a paper boy, and he came up the street with the afternoon papers in the back of his bicycle, and he was throwing the papers out on people's doorsteps. And the headline was, "Newton attorney called red." And that was why that son of mine never has anything to do with these things. He was in agony that day, I believe. He was handing out the papers about his dad. And that was a toughie. And no dinner table conversation. We weren't smart enough to know how to fix that up. That's too hard. So that was a bad memory. That's the 50s. The 60s are kind of hazy.
Some nice things that happened.
Nice things that happened, really connected with my husband, but were very rewarding, was during the, that had to be the 60s of the Vietnam War, when Dr. Spock had a Dr. Spock trial, which a lot of people seem to have forgotten about. There were 5 people that were on trial in Massachusetts. Lenny Boudin was the lawyer for Spock, so my husband was on the case because he was the Massachusetts attorney for a New York lawyer. And also I typed for that stuff for, I guess for Lenny Boudin. I did the typing, and it was exciting. And that case got turned down by the Court of Appeals, and those guys were free. So that had a happy ending. And that was one of the big...
What were they accused of?
They tore up draft cards in New
They
York
burned
City.
them?
Yeah, they tore them up. I don't remember if they burned them or tore them. They defied the laws, the draft laws. And there were 5 people on that of all different kind of backgrounds. One of them was the Reverend Coffin, and one of them was Dr. Spock. Dr. Spock has since died. And so that was very exciting, and I loved all that because I was typing and enjoying that. So it was one of the high spots of the bad. The bad stuff had good stuff connected with it because I met wonderful people, and then we had little victories, which I wouldn't have had if I hadn't been associated with the husband that I had. I wouldn't have had that on myself because I was kind of just plodding along with my little union organization. It was on a tiny scale. I was never named or any of that stuff. And all the people that I worked with in Washington that worked along that line, which was really unionizing, forming unions, we all were very much to the left, but nobody ever appeared before a committee, not a single person. Now that you can attribute to the fact that there was nobody in that whole bunch who ever talked, which would be the reason why the big shot lawyers and the people who had much more important jobs had people in among them who were spies. That's an important thing. Anyway, when I came to Boston, it was another life altogether. It wasn't anything like that, even though it touched on it in some ways. The Washington life was like a closed period. And in Massachusetts, I concentrated on something like getting signatures on a petition or going to meetings and feeling good or something like that. It was much easier and much less threatening, should we say. It was non-threatening. Okay. In Massachusetts, the friends that have mattered the most to me are people like Lillian Shubo, and who introduced me to the Voice of Women, and people who I met in the peace movement. I call it the peace movement, not the women's movement. And that's a good thing. Now, coming down to the problems of today, I have a problem. I'm all alone where I live in my thinking, reaching out, trying to find people that think somewhat like I do, but with the September 11th history, I haven't figured out, unless I talk to many more people, I haven't figured out what to do. I don't know what to do. I'm opposed to bombing, but I don't feel like letting 6,000 people be dead without doing something about it. I feel we were invaded in a way. We were invaded. So when you're invaded, you fight back. But I don't like the position of the United States coming on and bombing countries. And so I haven't formulated my role right now. And I have to find people who are going to help me to do it. I can't do it by myself. I've always turned to other people for help in formulating my political views. And some of them have died, and some of them are no good now. They're just, you don't get anything from them. And I'm at an impasse at this particular moment. It may all be over by tonight if something falls my way.
So you're living in a retirement community now?
Yeah, I live there, and I've found the peaceniks already. I went to a little trouble. It didn't take long to find them. And I don't have good vibes about them so far. I don't know their history really, but all I know is they have sounded dogmatic to me. And I'm on guard. Somebody already called me argumentative, which I don't like the sound of that, but it may be that in my efforts to find out what to do and where to stand on this, my teeny little self in this great big picture isn't going to change anything. But it's important for me before I depart to know what we peace people shall do.
So you're searching for a community to be with around this
I
issue?
am,
You can-
exactly.
yeah. Like you had for Voice
I
of
thought I
America.
had it. I thought I might have found it. But I'm withholding judgment. And maybe hiding in there somewhere is my, what shall I call such a person? My soulmate or something, but I don't think so. It's difficult, very difficult. I don't want to end on that note. We have to end it. Just in conclusion, I want to say that the experience of the years with the Peace Boutique and before the Peace Boutique, the Voice of Women, and meeting the women of that whole community were some of the most positive parts of my life in Massachusetts, and that I'm glad that I encountered them, and that Lillian Shubo pulled me into it, and that I had those years. Okay.